Yeah. So let's see. Okay. So the thing that I wanted to discuss, I wanted to do like an investigation with you. So basically, there's this problem that I've kind of noticed in specifically the videos that you've made or that you've kind of like featured in with Thomas Bogardus, Synth, and Joe Schmid. And the way I would kind of phrase it is like the problem of stalemate by regress and or circularity. So basically, the problem of stalemate is always like due to something like, as Joe Schmid said, conceptual disparity of sorts, right? Or not being able to break into someone's conceptual circle, or not being on the same page in an argument, or not sharing a belief in any premise all the way down. So it seems that this affects debates. If the whole point is, of course, to communicate something, and someone just keeps on asking you, what's the justification for that premise? What's the argument for that? And then you try to break it down to a semantic analysis, and then they do the exact same thing, but to concepts. I don't have that concept. Can you define that? Can you define that? Can you define that? Then we have a problem of sorts, right? Where we just simply cannot breach this kind of like impasse of sorts. And of course, like the question is, right? How would one give you the concept if we've broken the argument process down to semantic analysis, and we have started to experience this regress? How exactly do we terminate that kind of problem in semantic analysis? Do we have to drag the discourse down further to something else? So that would be like the first question, I guess.
I don't know that I have an answer to how to terminate a. I don't know how to resolve all problems of conceptual disparity.
Okay. Well, at the same time,
And to be clear, I'm not committed to the view that they can, in principle, be resolved. You could have some. You can create a situation where there's just like you make a hypothetical where there's some conceptual disparity that's just not resolvable. Like nothing said by this agent to that agent will cause them to understand the concept or to accept the argument, whatever talking about, like argument tunneling or concept tunneling. And there's nothing contradictory about that hypothetical. It just seems like that's just a coherent case to talk about. So
yeah, for sure.
yeah.
I should also probably clarify that I'm not going to involve any sort of weird, spooky realist notions here, and my motivations are strictly neutral. They do not have any sort of like realist bias or even a foundationalist bias. Doesn't even need to be a terminus. Just some sort of satisfactory way that we can approach the problem. And yeah, so yeah, the question is basically, if we can just focus on this one, the different types of ways that we can try and communicate a concept, right? To answer the question of how do I give you the concept, of course, is like we can define it in certain ways. We can give examples. We could give synonyms. We could contextualize it, right? Where basically we're trying to define desire in some sort of way indirectly, such as like the thing that you feel when you're hungry, that kind of thing. So it's like an indirect kind of contextualization. So if those things fail, right, and it seems like we've got a total hang up, how exactly are we supposed to approach the problem? Because let's say that the goal is to prevent this kind of stalemate, because it feels shitty to experience that kind of deadlock in a debate. Now, I'm kind of pulling from some things that you've said in the debates that you've had with Synth, as well as the conversation you had with Joe Schmid, right, where you talk about a phenomenological lexicon. Now, the phenomenological lexicon kind of compares our experiences and tries to hone in on the thing that is being talked about. So I'm wondering, what would a typical kind of scenario of, let's say that some sort of shared language has been established. We've gone through, I don't know, months and months and months of trying to develop a shared common experiential language. What would an example roughly look like of utilizing this phenomenological lexicon?
I don't really know exactly how to answer that. Like, the idea with the phenomenological lexicon is just, so to be clear, I'm not. I understand that in principle there could be irresolvable problems of conceptual disparity, and in practice I don't always have really an angle on how to resolve them once they get to a certain level. the phenomenological lexicon is like sort of an idea of how to try to resolve them, but it's not going to, in principle, be able to resolve every disparity. But the idea is just that we kind of try to carefully examine our phenomenology and build a shared way to describe it. And the hope is just that we dissolve these linguistic separations through the creation of the lexicon. Then when it comes to your question, which I think was how would it be used to the question was kind of weird, but it's not like you use it to do something. You just build the lexicon and it like replaces the prior confusing dual language.
Yeah. Now,
And then you just talk in the same way. Then you have a univocal way to speak about things.
yeah, yeah,
If you succeed in the project, it might be that we can't succeed at building such a lexicon for whatever reason.
for sure. Oh, okay, got you. Yeah, yeah. So now, again, just to clarify further, basically, I don't want to presuppose any sort of like invariantist, non-contextualist approach, right, as well. So if we have that on the table, I just want to make sure that, yeah, anything that I'm kind of posing here in terms of intuition pumps is not supposed to get you towards some sort of invariantist, I guess, system of sorts. It could be utilizable only in as much as like a phenomenological lexicon would, where it has its own limitations, and it may or may not work. It's like it depends on if the process is successful, that kind of thing. But I kind of want to walk us both through like the different levels of the kind of thought experiment that I'm posing here, because I want to kind of get us to a point where we see some like specific mechanism that is probably central to this whole issue that may actually restrict what the phenomenological lexicon is even capable of doing, right? Or it could explain why there's certain cases where the phenomenological lexicon wouldn't be successful, right? So, in order to begin that, in order to begin the process of kind of using this thought experiment to kind of intuition pump you towards that, I typically go for terms that are primitive in a sense, or I don't mean that they're actually primitive and it's like you can never ever define them or provide an analysis for them. Just terms that we don't currently have an analysis for, or we don't currently have a definition for, such as, the color purple or the concept of desire. Right. So what I've written down in the document here is basically there are certain terms we don't have an analysis of that we nonetheless understand and take for granted that they can feature in truth app sentences. And then the question is, how can we explicitly show that these terms have or contribute to the truth conditions of a sentence outside of providing an analysis? And yeah, we can kind of explore that together.
I'm not sure I have anything to say about that. I don't really. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, we can drop that question, right? But it does seem important in a sense to this kind of question, because with a phenomenological lexicon approach, we're not necessarily defining things, are we? We're almost trying to, like you said, univocally kind of see it, literally see it, in a sense. Like what is being talked about, whether or not our experiences differ in any sort of important way, or if it just turns out that we experience things in the exact same way and we're categorizing things just using different. Well, ultimately, it's just a verbal dispute, not a substantive one, in other words, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's the idea is that you can have verbal disputes that are a function of so many like layers of linguistic confusion that it's just not obvious it's verbal, and that if you were to like build out the terminology to be used in the debate in a shared way where you start from something, well, that it at least intuitively seems common to me, like our experience that I expect is common. Like, I think realists also, for the most part, expect that our experience is pretty common. They think that we also, well, let's not actually go that far, because it's not really the case. But yeah, the idea is just like, you build out this this set of shared terms, and then it, oh, sorry, I kind of forgot what I was saying. I was smoking weed earlier today, or vaping.
Okay, no worries. Okay, we'll try and keep this nice and chill then, right? Okay, so basically, there is something still weird that's going on here, where we don't have explicit kind of analyses, or we don't know how to provide the sense of certain concepts, like purple or desire. But we nonetheless seem to really accurately use them, like, to form things like propositions, which are truth apt. So there has to be something that these words contribute to the truth conditions of sentences without them needing to have analyses. So whenever we say that, let's say, that book on the table is purple, despite the fact that we don't know how to analyze the concept of purple, we still are able to use it and use it as if it has like some sort of contribution to the truth conditions of the sentence that involved it. And the question there is, what specifically gave it that contribution? Or how exactly did we draw that contribution to the truth conditions? Do you have
Honestly,
anything?
Darren, I don't even know what an answer. I'm not sure I even understand what an answer to something like that would look like. So I don't know. I probably don't really understand the question.
Okay.
Like, I don't. Some of that language, show something contributes to truth. Like, what does it mean for a word to contribute to truth? Like, it's just if you have that word there, you have like a properly formed English sentence. Like, how does it contribute? Like, is it like via grammar? Like, I don't even know what it means to contribute. It's kind of like a vague. I guess I just don't really understand what the question is asking.
Sure. Okay, so now whenever we say that an object on the table is purple, right? There's something that's satisfying the conditions of applying the concept purple to it. Now, in our previous conversation, we kind of boiled it down. It wasn't about grammar, that it was about reference. So there is some sort of like extra analytic, like non-analytic, in other words, contribution. And by contribution, I just mean that, if the term actually turned out to be meaningless, right, then the sentence wouldn't be truth apt. So we would have a problem if it turned out that those words were meaningless. So, and the reason that it would be problematic would be for the exact same reason as when moral realists like to use the term, almost like a noun phrase, stance-independent reason, right? So, given that they use those terms or phrases in sentences where they're saying like stance-independent reasons exist, right, to try and like feature it in a proposition that's saying something, if that term or phrase is meaningless, then the sentence is no longer truth apt. So in that sense, that phrase or sentence actually contributes something to the overall proposition's truth conditions. It determines whether or not.
You lost me. Wait, right there you lost me. What does it mean for a phrase contributes to a sentence's truth? Like, are you just saying that, like, if I have a sentence and I say that's a big, and then we could put different words there. Like if I go apple, we have a proposition, and if I go blah, 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 we don't have a proposition. So I understand that. I don't know what it means for it to play a role other than to like be able to participate in the formation of like a like English sentence or something. Like I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't think I'm really like understanding or probably giving you what you're asking for here.
That's fine. So let me think how to phrase this. So whenever we do use a sentence that involves terms, what would you say determines whether or not that sentence is truth apt? Is it the meanings of words, or is it something else?
Determines what? Yeah, I don't know. That's not something I've really like thought about.
Okay. Because it's mostly just to do with logic. What determines whether or not a sentence is a proposition, specifically?
What determines if it's a proposition?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, a proposition is just a truth apt sentence. So if you're not just re-asking the prior question about like, you know, like what my theory of truth is, which I don't have a theory of truth. Then I don't really know like how to answer that. It's not something I've thought about.
But at the same time, I would say you're pretty good at identifying whether or not a sentence is truth apt, right? We tend to do this very naturally, and I've seen you do it very naturally in debates. If there's any way for us to kind of like explore that further, how, like, if you could describe your process of identifying something as being either truth apt or just gibberish, is that something that you'd be down to just kind of like explore with me right now?
It would. I mean, I can explore whatever, but like I don't have any kind of like view built on that or anything. Like I would just be like trying to think about my experience and what it seems like is happening in my experience. So
Yeah.
I don't think I'd have anything. You know, it's probably not the best thing to talk about. I'd prefer to talk about things where I have something to say. You know, rather than like if I asked you like, hey, let's talk about like, you know, the Boston Pizza. You'd be like, well, I've not really spent much time at Boston Pizza. I don't really know any. Like, I guess I could like try to say things better. Like, they probably have pineapple. You know, that's kind of how it feels to me. It's like it's just not something that I like have thought about or have thoughts on or have found makes any difference to anything I'm doing really.
Okay.
Like, I mean, these are interesting questions and they're good for philosophy. But there's tons of interesting questions in philosophy, and I don't, you know, I don't approach all of them. So.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Like, everything.
Yeah. So it's one of those things. Is like we could talk about all kinds of shit in philosophy, but what makes the difference between whether or not it's an interesting discussion is if both participants actually have something to say about it, or both participants are interested in it, and that's something that's difficult to kind of like establish in the first place. You're either on the same page in a sense, or you're not, right?
Well, like,
So
what is the ultimate thing you're getting at here? Like, what's like the end of like where are you trying to get at underneath like the whole conversation?
yeah, so basically, I've detected that there are certain shortcomings in the phenomenological lexicon approach, but there's also shortcomings. I mean,
Wait, wait,
this is
wait, wait, stop
yeah.
right there. Wait. What do you mean by a shortcoming in the approach?
So that this is something I was going to build to. I'd have to actually go back down the notes there, because I'm just telling you what I'm building to, right? I'm telling you the ultimate end
Yeah,
goal. Yeah.
I'm not asking you to justify it. I'm just trying to understand what you mean when you say there's issues. What are you talking about?
Oh yeah. So an example of an issue would be, say, for instance, you're talking to someone colorblind. Of course, this isn't this isn't necessarily a goal that one would necessarily
Oh,
have.
sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, just to be clear, by issue you just mean that it's not it's logically possible
Yeah.
to take the approach and there still be a conceptual disparity.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. That's yeah.
Oh,
So it's
sure, sure. Yeah,
a
okay,
pretty
yeah, that yeah.
trivial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I agree with that. So your overall point. Okay, so I understand what you said that it's logically possible to try to build a phenomenological lexicon and not be able to resolve conceptual disparity with it. Sure.
Yeah, I probably phrased that poorly. I don't think that there's an issue, right? Again, issues are relative to one's goals, or even shortcomings. Shortcoming is not necessarily the most accurate word to use there. There's just
Oh, that's
I'll
fine.
probably
I wasn't objecting because I mind you saying there's a shortcoming. It's I just want to know if we agree on what the shortcoming is, and if all
yeah
you mean by it is just that it's logically possible to do this and still have conceptual disparity, then absolutely.
yeah. So
So what is the overall thing you're getting at here? Like what's your big point in this conversation? What are you trying to get at?
yes. If we're interested in, like, say, using the phenomenological lexicon to approach the problem of conceptual disparity, we should also be interested in the core mechanism that is involved in all of these disputes and all of these kinds of like attempts at resolution, which is, I'm going to argue, the act of referring to things. If we could figure out a way to more precisely and more accurately refer to things in a way that's kind of like very explicit about what exactly we're picking out in our experiences, we may be able to make or cover more ground and resolve more problems than we would otherwise.
Wait, how's that different than the phenomenological lexicon approach though? Like you're saying you want to be clear, like that you can be clear with like you understand that can also still leave you with conceptual disparity, right? Like you try to
Yeah,
be as clear unless you have some whole theory about clarity that's not like eliminates conceptual disparity or something like. Yeah, I mean, being really clear about what we mean, I would take that to be part of building a good phenomenological lexicon. You have to very carefully investigate the phenomenology and try to describe it and converge on a description of it and stuff and be precise.
yeah,
So yeah, if the overall thing that you're trying to say in this conversation is if we're interested in the phenomenological lexicon approach, then we should also be interested in clearly defining these phenomenological states or something. Then like that's just part of the approach. So that's like saying like if you're into you know basketballs, then you're in, or if you're into basketball, then you're into a sport. Like yeah.
yeah. True. So there is another part of the end goal here, is basically
Sure.
to identify that there's actually a level under the phenomenological lexicon, under the phenomenological level. So I've broken it down into 4 tiers, where you can drag empirical discourse down to logical discourse down to semantic discourse, and then you can take semantic discourse down to the phenomenological discourse. But then we have the ultimate hellacious level, the penultimate level. You can drag the phenomenological level down to the ontological level. Now, yeah, it gets a little bit spooky. Well, not necessarily, but I think that if we're able to kind of get below the phenomenological level, things become a little bit clearer, especially for cases like the colorblind instance. And that's what I want to ultimately argue, that we can gain that extra bit of clarity in virtue of dragging it further, right, to this ontological level. And I'll give you the thought experiment, or the kind of reasoning behind, or even the just describing what it would even mean to drag a phenomenological level down to the ontological level. Like, I'm happy to do that. I mean, that's the purpose of this conversation. Sure. So, without further ado, I was going to bring up the thing that we discussed towards the end of our last conversation, because I think this is probably a good starting point. Where we're talking about the stalemate by regress and or circularity, or the problem of why tunneling to absolute stalemate, right? So I kind of get the intuition that this exact same problem, where realists when they're trying to define their concepts are constantly failing, right? No matter what they do, and it may just be either that they cannot express it. That is assuming that it is a substantive dispute, which is obviously debatable, right? But if it's verbal, if it's just merely verbal, how exactly do we, how do we demonstrate that it is just simply a linguistic dispute and it isn't simply substantive, right? So I'm thinking that the exact same type of problem is applicable to people who may be cognitive anti-realists who are sympathetic to metaphysical eliminativism, right? And of course, by cognitive anti-realism, I just mean cognitivist anti-realism, as we discussed before.
Well, wait, to be clear, like, I think that you can have this happen with any topic. Like, you could have this happen with, like, cars or, like, octopi or something.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're going to say that someone could just as well lack the real or the anti-realist concept, that's not something we, like, disagree about.
Yeah. Yeah, it's because, like, the majority of people that you'd be talking to anyway would already have the concept of desire and so on and so on. But
you could have someone who doesn't. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
I would hold. You don't think that somehow, like, undermines my view or is something I'm not aware of, right?
Absolutely
like,
not. Yeah.
Like, obviously, someone could just be in the same position with respect to the anti-realist as the anti-realist is with respect to the realist.
Yeah. So
okay.
One of the really interesting kind of examples that I kind of came up with was basically that suppose you're debating a moral naturalist and eliminative materialist with a Cronenberg monstrosity morphing the worst of Sam Harris and the Churchlands together in one person. As such, they're inclined to eliminate attitudinal states like desire in virtue of them seeming metaphysically thick or spooky. And if this realist is able to perform a competent semantic analysis on the term desire, as used in arguments for cognitive anti-realism, the anti-realist will have the same problem as any other realist, even if we deflate said realist stance. So, like, this would obviously be a case of, but it's like you wouldn't ever find one of these realists to begin with. But yeah, it's one of those just like intriguing points where it's like if this kind of person were to exist, say for instance, we've got some sort of like a different version of Isaac in a different possible world who is your absolute like antithesis in every philosophical sense possible. They're a realist and they're an eliminative materialist. So despite the fact that they're both, they have the same type of debate inclinations as you do, if this type of realist was to approach you with the exact same techniques and tactics that you utilize, it would seem like an unstoppable force meets an immovable object, right? It's just one of those points of interest. So that's.
No, I agree with that. That's right. And it could also, just to be clear, there's nothing special about morality. Like, again, this could happen with any topic.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just want to take this back just to, for the sake of kind of clearly defining where we're at in the conversation. So we're at a point where we've kind of established the context surrounding the issue of stalemate by regress and or circularity, the whole Y tunneling stuff. They're basically like, for any given stage of a conversation, if it's empirical, you can drag it down to the epistemic framework and just debating about the logic behind it, right? Whether it's logically consistent, if it's a coherent framework to begin with, if it kind of like involves some sort of spooky shit that most people would be inclined to reject, or even if their own institutions would be inclined to reject it, right? If you're talking to someone who's like a nutrition expert or expert in quotations, right? And they're using some dog shit epistemic framework, I don't know. I'm trying to think of an example. Who's the Sorry?
Chris Masterjohn?
Yeah, we got that, but we also have people like fucking, who's the nutrition watchdog? What's his name? He's the Kiwi.
Oh,
Kiwi
Bart.
guy.
Bart
Yeah,
K.
Bart K. Yeah. So...
Yeah, he's totally insane.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's still fleeing Obby. It's been years.
Yeah. It's beautiful. It's so beautiful. Just the fleeing, the little rodent strategy. I love it.
Yeah. It's very rodential.
That's a good word. I'll have to use that one.
I don't think it is a word, honestly.
Yeah. But yeah, so once we've kind of like broken down from the empirical discourse, we've dragged it down to logic, where we put pressure on whether or not we can... when we've broken it down to logic and we're just like keeping track of the propositions, and it seems like we can't even reach kind of an agreement when we're kind of analyzing each other's arguments. Well, what's your argument for this? If that process, what's your argument for this, just continues on ad infinitum, we can choose to kind of like bypass that process. We can in a sense terminate it for the sake of discourse by just simply butting down on, okay, hold on, there may be something wrong that's happening here, something going afoul, where we just simply ask, okay, hold on, what do you mean by this term, right? So we can stop it there by questioning whether or not one of the premises on which their arguments lie are even truth apt to begin with. And we see this in conversations with realists all the time, where it's like, Oh, not all the time, right? It only seems to have really started to pick up pace where you get people like Lance Bush and yourself, and as well as many others, starting to actually question whether or not any of the realist theses are even truth apt, right? This seems to be something that's more recent development. So this kind of strategy seems to be becoming more and more popular for very good reason. It feels like it actually prevents a lot of unnecessary like humoring of things that could very well just be fucking gibberish, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I really like. Did you ever read um, Pragmatism, William James?
no, I'm familiar with William James, but I haven't read his works.
Have you heard the squirrel example?
No, are you able to kind of like articulate what the example was?
I am able to literally read it if you give me a sec.
Yeah, sure.
Because it's part of this video I'm working on. Yeah, okay, so this is from lecture 2 on pragmatism. Okay, so some years ago, being with a camping party in the mountains, I returned from a solitary ramble to find everyone engaged in a ferocious metaphysical dispute. The corpus of the dispute was a circle, a squirrel, sorry, a live squirrel, supposed to be clinging to one side of a tree trunk, while over against the tree's opposite side, a human being was imagined to stand. This human witness tries to get sight of the squirrel by moving rapidly round the tree, but no matter how fast he goes, the squirrel moves as fast in the opposite direction, and always keeps the tree between himself and the man, so that never a glimpse of him is caught. The resultant metaphysical problem now is this: does the man go round the squirrel or not? He goes round the tree, sure enough, and the squirrel is on the tree, but does he go round the squirrel? In the unlimited leisure of the wilderness, discussion had been worn threadbare. Everyone had taken sides and was obstinate. And the number on both sides were even. Each side, when I appeared, therefore appealed to me to make it a majority. Mindful of the scholastic adage that whenever you meet a contradiction, you must make a distinction, I immediately sought and found one, as follows. Which party is right, I said, depends on what you practically mean by going round the squirrel. If you mean passing from north of him to the east, then to the south, then to the west, and then to the north of him again, obviously the man does go around him, for he occupies these successive positions. But if on the contrary you mean being first in front of him, then on the right of him, then behind him, then on his left, and finally in front again, it is quite as obvious that the man fails to go around him, for by the compensating movements the squirrel makes, he keeps his belly turned towards the man at all times, and his back turned away. Make the distinction, and there is no occasion for any further dispute. You are both right and both wrong, according as you conceive the verb to go round, in one practical fashion or another. Although one or two of the hotter disputants called my speech a shuffling evasion, reminiscent of reality much, saying they wanted no quibbling or scholastic hair splitting, but meant just plain honest English round. Sorry, these are just all things people have actually said to me, so it's hilarious.
Yeah.
The majority seemed to think that the distinction had assuaged the dispute. So, yeah, this is like broad, and I know Lance also is aware of this passage and really likes James overall, but this is like broadly the kind of approach that I'm taking when I get into these kind of questions about philosophy. Like when people start all this spooky metaphysics stuff, whether it's like grounding or like metaphysical modality or any of the other gibberish, natural, non-natural, fuck, I don't know. There's a lot of
Internal, non-internal.
Well, depending on the context, I
Yeah.
don't know that that's gibberish, but there's different kinds of internalism and external. But yeah, so anyway, when I see these terms, this is what I want to do, right? I think I'm not convinced that we are having disputes a lot of the time. I'm very cognizant of the fact that I might be one of these like people at the campfire arguing about the squirrel. So for me, it's very important that we come to the same understanding of what is meant by the thing in question so that we can actually determine if we disagree, and then assuming that we do, we can have, we can give arguments for or against the thing. So in reading that, I kind of forgot exactly what prompted me into this, but I feel like you're saying something about my approach or other people's approach, and I just want to say that this is like broadly the kind of thing that I aim to do in these discussions.
Yeah. So let me try and retrace, because I'm trying to think, okay, what was the general topic that we just kind of covered there? So I believe I referred to Lance, right, with respect to what he does, where he's trying to track whether or not even the theses of realism versus anti-realism, not necessarily if anti-realism's theses are truth apt, but whether or not realism's thesis, central thesis, or one of the three, are even intelligible, whether or not they're even truth apt. So it's like we can't even say whether or not they're actually able to be true in the first place, or we're even able to have a debate about it, which would seem to kind of push us strongly in the direction that it's just a merely verbal dispute, right? And I think this actually quite nicely takes us to the next part of the subject, or the next part of the conversation, where if say for instance, there are certain words that we can't define with analyses or just like straightforward definitions. There are certain curious cases where we don't necessarily need a definition or an analysis in order to grasp their intelligibility, right? And to grasp that they can be a part of propositions without rendering them non-propositional, right? And the examples that I gave were the color purple and desire, right? So these are definitely curious cases where if we were to say, for instance, start to debate whether or not to say, I don't know, some sort of anti-realist thesis about morality or anti-realist thesis about color even are even intelligible, we still nonetheless kind of, as like good anti-realists, would be able to grasp them as being, or claims that involve those terms as being intelligible, as being propositional. They have clear cases of when they would be true and when they wouldn't be true. Now, this seems also very similar to the realists' case, right? Where it's like they just simply cannot define what stance-independent reason is. Or when they do, it's still incredibly problematic. Or it seems to either involve the exact same types of terms that are in dispute, that are like stance-independent and normative, or that seem to be, say, for instance, just purely descriptive. And then the question is then, how exactly do we get something normative from something purely descriptive, and so on and so on. So basically, we have the exact same type of issue we would get with the realist, but in the anti-realist case as well. And the thing is, we don't seem to be able to provide analyses or definitions for terms like desire and the color purple. But nonetheless, we still treat them as being intelligible. Because obviously, I probably actually have to ask you this one then. Would you consider the term desire to be able to feature in a proposition?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And so there would be clear-cut cases where you would accept that a proposition, I desire to eat an apple, would be true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So then the question is, how exactly do we go through the process of explaining to someone else, like an eliminative materialist, say for instance, who doesn't have a concept of desire? How would we go about saying that the term desire actually is capable of featuring in a proposition without rendering it non-propositional?
No idea.
Yeah.
I think that there might be a bit of a confusion about what my interests in philosophy are. Like, because a lot of the things you're asking are questions that I like deeply don't care about. Like,
Yeah.
for instance, like no, it's not. A lot of them are interesting questions. Sorry to be clear. A lot of them are good, interesting questions, as many of them were last time we talked. But when you start asking, it's like when someone asks, like, and how would you persuade a carnist who's like on board with like mass murdering chill? It's like,
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe there's a way to do it, but I have like no interest in that. Just sounds like a miserable conversation. I'm not sure why. Like, I guess maybe if you're into the psychology or something, it might be interesting. But from like, I'm not that interested in psychology, and all of that sounds like, it's starting to be about psychology. So yeah, I mean, when it comes to like how do you share your concepts with people or something like that, like, I mean, I'm gonna have like basic views. Like, I could try to define it, I could try to give examples, and if you ask deeper questions of, okay, someone doesn't get any of that, now what strategy you want to use? It's like, I don't know, there might be more, but like if I ever get that far in the conversation, I just would like not continue at that point. I'd be like, yeah, the conceptual gap is just like too large here for me to like be motivated to talk to someone like this.
Yeah. So
if someone told me they didn't have a concept of like of the word a or the, or a concept of like just like pick your like insanely basic like English language components, I would just be like, well, I'd be skeptical if they're telling the truth, I guess, but maybe realists are skeptical if we're telling the truth. But I wouldn't be interested in talking to a person like that. I'd just be like, okay, well, you can have that view, because you also have to understand, like, on my point of view, there's no cost to me if there's people who I can't communicate with. Like,
yeah.
It's like, I mean, there might be a cost in terms of achieving certain ends in reality. Like, if we want to do some project together and it requires communicating, if we speak two different languages, that could be a problem. But it's not like, a blow against any of the views I have in philosophy if there's cases where I don't know how to communicate the concepts I have to people, or if in principle there are concepts I have that just aren't communicable to other people.
Yeah.
So it's, I guess from my point of view, it's like I'm not interested in the psychology. Like, someone should do it and it's important, but in the same way, there's tons of things that should be done and are important that I'm not personally interested in doing. So I'm not interested in doing the psychology. And if it's about philosophy, on the philosophical side, I just can't see the cost to my view for any of these things. So that's why a lot of what you're getting from me in this conversation is just like, oh yeah, sure. No, I don't really know how I deal with that, but like I
Yeah.
don't see why it matters.
Yeah. So again, I think I did specify this last time we talked as well. The focus is not. It's supposed to stay as far away from psychology and empirics as possible. So I'm only using the instance of you talking to someone who is like an eliminative materialist, and the whole thing about they're not grasping the concept as just a framing device. The biggest thing is kind of
Well, wait. Whether it's a framing device or not, it does nothing specific about that conversation is making me say this.
okay.
It could be about any topic, and it would sound psychological to me. The question, how do you persuade this person, would
Oh, of
sound
course, yeah,
psychological. Like,
yeah.
do you am I mishearing your question, or do you somehow not construe that question psychologically?
Yeah, no, I
To
do.
me, that's a clear
Yeah.
psychological
Yeah,
question.
yeah, yeah. No, we both agree on that. I think there's been perhaps a miscommunication on my part about what exactly I'm asking. So
Or a mishearing on my part. It might not be your fault.
yeah, no, you're all good. I think you're fine. So basically, I'm trying to figure out what exactly kind of what reasons would you have for treating a word like desire as being meaningful, and kind of walking through the process if that is something that if that's something that you'd be actually willing to do, like kind of walking through your process, what actually gives you this, or what gives you a reason to treat desire as something that can feature in propositions.
Well, again, I'm giving you my time, so I'm happy to talk about like whatever. Like, it's just what I have to say will be. I'll have more to say about some things than others. What was the exact phrasing of the question? Say it one more time?
Yeah, what reasons do you have to say that desires can feature in a proposition?
I have a hard time even when you phrase it like that, understanding what it means. It just sounds like you're asking about a well-formed English sentence. It's like desire is like a noun. If it shows up like where a noun should show up, then it's like good.
Yeah, so I'm kind
If
of
you're asking about why I have the concept or something,
no.
that's like some causal thing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So now I'm talking with respect to a specific quote that I recall you saying, and it's further down on my document here, but it had to do with
Sure.
basically. I'll actually pull up the quote. Let's see.
Sure.
So it had to do with reference, like we mentioned before. Let's see, where is it? I think actually pulling up this exact quote will be incredibly illuminating. It'll tell us like precisely what I'm. Well, it'll better frame what I'm trying to ask you. I'll try and remember. I'll try to recall it offhand. Basically, it was like when someone is like using words that they're saying is intelligible, right? And basically, you lack the concept, right? There's this kind of this thing where it's like I do not have your concept. Like because how am I supposed to say whether or not this concept is supposed to be able to feature in a proposition, right? If I don't even know what the fuck it refers to, right? It could just refer to some gibberish. So the question is, what exactly about reference here, like, enables us to utilize desire in a proposition? I think that's probably a really poor way of phrasing that.
Yeah, it's like that when I hear that, it's just not distilling into any like clear thing in my head. Like desire is like a noun. So if you have a sentence and like it's properly formed, it's like there's some kind of structure like a linguist would tell you about where it's got to have like a subject and a predicate and like there's certain places where a noun can appear. And like if it fits those rules, then it's like constructed properly. Like that feels like not what you want to hear, but that's like the closest I get to having any idea what you're like talking about.
Yeah, I found the quote, by the way. It was, I can't accept some proposition like X exists, but I'm not sure what X refers to. It might not even be a proposition to say it exists. Imagine if it just refers to some gibberish. So,
Like, does it say I can't accept a proposition like X exists?
um,
Or I can?
no. So this is 24 minutes and 24 seconds into your debate with Bogartis, where you said, of course, I'm obviously I'm going to accept, like, say, for instance, clarifying what you mean there, of course. So what you said was, I can't accept some proposition like X exists, but I'm not sure what X refers to.
I can't. Sorry, it's just your accent is hard for me. You can't. Is that a can't or a can in that sentence?
Cannot.
cannot. Yeah, because there's it's funny because there's an interpretation that I can think of where either would make sense. So I'm like,
Mm.
yeah. So I understand the point that I'm making there. I'm just saying if I don't know what the word means, I'm not sure that the sentence it features in is a proposition. That's right.
Yeah, but it seems like this type of way of uncovering its meaning seems non-grammatical in a sense.
Wait. Way of one second. Way of uncovering its. I'm not sure that's what I'm doing.
Grasping its meaning.
I'm
Like,
not sure that's what I'm.
okay,
I'm telling you. A, I'm stating some fact about. I don't know how to classify what I'm doing, but I don't know that I'm doing any of those. I'm just saying
okay,
that if the proposition turns out being meaningless, then that property is going to like transfer to, or sorry, the term. Then that's going to transfer to the or the sentence that the term features in.
yeah,
So I'm not sure I'm telling you like how just neither of the ways you just phrased it resonated with me as what I'm doing there.
yeah. That's fair. That's fair. Okay. So when you do say that, or if I'm not sure what X refers to,
Hmm.
what would you say you mean by like what X refers to?
I don't have any like, theory of
True.
reference or anything. It's not an area I
Yes.
think about.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, that's my bad. That's right. I don't want to kind of
That's
like get
okay.
you onto like some sort of an analysis of a theory of reference or a theory of meaning. I'm trying to stray away from that as far as possible. Just trying to explore again. So, um, yeah, it's I can probably rephrase the question where it's like, okay, what reasons do we have to think concepts like purple or desire refer to things, but that concepts like stance independent reason refers to gibberish? And I think it's gonna have to do
I don't
with like you saying you either have the concept or you don't, right?
I don't know when you ask what reason we have to think this refers to something. I don't know if I can give reasons. Like I mean I could try to be like people seem to use it and they communicate and there's some degree of success. Like you would maybe try to make some like empirical claim like that or something, but
Oh,
like I just know what certain words mean. I don't know how to tell you like why I know what they mean or give like reason. Even reasons there. Like I mean there's like a causal story about why I know what something means, but a reason why I know what it means. Is that like are you talking about an epistemic justification for the proposition that I know what X means, where X is like whatever word?
no, not necessarily. But of
So
course,
if
we
you
could
don't
definitely talk
mean
about
if you
contextualism
don't
here.
if you wait if you don't mean an epistemic justification or a causal explanation, what do you mean by reason?
Yeah.
Reason
So,
that it refers to something?
say for instance. Oh, well, okay. I just answered the question directly. Sorry, I'm not going to careen off. Yeah. So whenever we're saying that a concept is meaningful, right? Um, typically that means that we understand its meaning, and the way that we typically understand its meaning would be through like a definition, right? But that's not necessarily the only way that we can understand the meaning of a term. As you
Sorry, Darren, you're losing me. Just
okay,
the thing I'm trying to understand. Let me just remember because I just didn't I don't understand how that was answering the thing I'm asking about.
true.
If when you say reason, you don't mean causal explanation and you don't mean epistemic justification?
No.
What do you mean by reason?
Um, in this case, it'd be just simply pointing out like the thing that gives the word its meaningfulness.
What does gives mean there? If you're not talking about epistemic justification or causal explanation?
I don't know. I don't know how to. I don't know how to classify my own way. I'm just using language really loosely here in a sense. So
Yeah, because the thing is, for me, when I'm trying to understand that proposition, it's like you're saying that there's some relation that you refer to as giving or as reason between, I guess, something
mm,
and the proposition, and or sorry, the proposition that this has meaning. So there's a reason that a proposition has meaning,
mm,
or that you're speaking like that, and the reason by reason you don't mean causal explanation, and you don't mean epistemic justification. So I just don't know what you mean by reason that word has meaning.
mm. I could probably give you an example. Would that be because I know
An
you
example to illustrate what you mean by reason.
to give an example of what I mean by like giving a reason for why a word has a meaning.
Well,
It,
giving a reason. I want to know what the thing I'm trying to understand is the reason bit.
mm,
What is you can explain it by example if you want, but I don't want an explanation for something else that involves reason. I want to know what you mean
yeah,
by reason itself there, because I would understand if you said epistemic justification and then It's like there's some epistemic justification for the proposition that it has meaning, and that's where we get into like, okay, maybe you try to build some argument where you look at people and you're like, oh, they're communicating and stuff, and it seems maybe you build some kind of argument there, and you're like, okay, therefore this has meaning.
Mm.
Causal explanation, it's like, okay, we take for granted that it has meaning, and it's like, what's the kind of causal story that explains that? And then we talk about like molecules or history or something like that. I would understand both of those kinds of conversations, but if by reason you mean something other than that, then I am confused.
Right. So, okay. By reason, in this case, I'd probably say just simply providing a definition or providing something that communicates the meaning of the word. That tells us,
So
okay, this word is meaningful because this definition is what defines it. This is what gives it the meaning in a sense.
meaningful, because I don't know if it makes sense to say something is meaningful because
Yeah, yeah.
a
Sure.
definition.
Mm.
I don't like, it depends what you mean by because. If it's like a causal because, then I don't know. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
If it's just like something is meaningful, if something has a definition, then it's meaningful. Then that I would agree with. I agree that definitions are sufficiency conditions for meaning.
Yeah, that's probably a better way to phrase it, is to phrase it in terms of sufficiency conditions.
Uh-huh. But that's no longer talking about. Oh yeah, right. That's not talking so much about reason as yeah, sufficiency conditions,
Yeah.
right? But you could mean that by reason, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's what I'm saying. I'm just using it kind of loosely, because like in this very conversation where you're asking me what I mean by reason, I would classify a successful answer to that question as being my reason, my reason for thinking that reason was meaningful in that sentence. So yeah, it's just a very kind of loose way of just describing the types of things that we support what we're saying with. In terms of support, I just mean like the things that we use to clarify or to kind of like show, to demonstrate that something is true, demonstrate that something is even truth apt, and so on and so on. It's just really, really generalized way of using reason.
Yeah, well, the problem is, it's like when someone says, you remember in that squirrel circling article, I'm
Yeah.
just using the good old-fashioned English definition of this, or like when someone says, when you try to ask what modality they're using, and they're like, I just mean can. It's like,
Oh yeah, Darth Dawkins.
okay, but the whole problem is that I will give different your the thing you're asking about is ambiguous between these different interpretations, according to which I'd give different answers. So without
Yeah.
clarity, I have like this like set of different answers, some of which are not even compatible with each other.
Yeah.
Um, or wait, will they all be? Wait, okay, wait, forget that. That might not be true. But the point is, there's a set of answers, and they're not all the same answer. And if you don't narrow down what you mean, I'm just sitting here going, I don't know what kind of way he intends the question. And
Mm.
the thing is, if you appeal to like a standard use of reason, like I, I, I think people have this like loose lay notion, but upon examination, I don't understand what that notion is if it doesn't reduce to something like epistemic justification,
Okay.
causal explanation, something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, you'd have to be more precise for me to answer, because I just don't really understand what you mean by reason.
Okay. So now interpreting the question as being about just simply sufficiency, right? So what would be the sufficient conditions for like the color purple or the concept of purple and the concept of desire, referring to things, right? Because we can't provide an analysis or we can't provide a definition, or at least for the time being. It may actually be the
Yeah,
case that we can in the future, but this one.
I think you might be asking the wrong person. Like I don't have like really views on reference.
Yeah.
It's not like a topic I think about.
Okay. That's totally fine.
You could
So
ask Troy or someone. I think Troy would probably
yeah,
have that.
yeah, I love that dude. He's so good. Lots of very interesting things to say. Lots of interesting things that he's interested in as well, like direct reference, Barbara Partey's work, and so on and so on. Like yeah, he's just like a wealth of knowledge on that stuff. But
Yeah, for me, like I don't I don't know. I find a lot of these things like computer science, philosophy. I don't I don't know if I really have like a pure interest in them, honestly. For it was kind of a weird thing because for a long time I saw myself as a guy who wanted to get really good at philosophy. I was like, yeah, I'd like to get really good at this. But the more I like learn about how I actually am as a person, it's like I don't really care about like huge amounts of like CS or like I just have some goals in life, and some of them require philosophy. Like I want to be
mm,
able to have the vegan conversation and not get like knocked over while I'm trying to have that conversation, so I learned some philosophy. There's some other things that interest me. I learned some more philosophy, but I don't actually like have the kind of interest in philosophy where I just am like, I'm gonna go like read about this and read about that. I don't know. Maybe one day I'll be like that, but no, I'm not. I'm not really just like a philosophy encyclopedia. I don't. There's tons of areas that I just don't have views on because I don't have any practical motivation to have a view. No, none of the things that I care about arguing about are undermined by anything someone says with respect to that thing. So I'm kind of just like not motivated to work out a view on it. If that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Again, it's the whole relativity to goals. So,
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's frustrating for you if I've said things that you find insightful on some topic and it connects to another thing, and then you're like, "Oh, this bridges to this other thing that I really care about," and like, "What are your thoughts on this?" And I'm like, "Nothing." I feel that
yeah.
would be kind of annoying for you, but sadly, that's actually the reality. Like, I really, philosophy is largely like a means to an end for me. It's not a like a purist kind of interest. It's like there's things I care about. I like to be able to argue those things well. I'll learn philosophy for those things.
Yeah.
You know how actually I was gonna make a mean joke, so I won't do it. Never mind.
No, no, go for it. Go for it, man. Legit.
Well, there's some people who will say that. No, actually, no, I'm not gonna. It's fine, yeah. But anyway, that's my motivation though.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm sorry if I'm letting you down a bit, but like there's
No,
just lots
man.
of areas that I've just have never really had any reason to form a view about, and like reference is one of those, truth theories is one of those. There's things that I have had to think about that I'll have a bit more formulated of a view on, and I'll know more of the like standard philosophy terminology, like like if you start talking about ethics, that's an area I have a bit more knowledge about, or
Mm.
and I know a bit of stuff about logic, but you can also easily go beyond my knowledge in those topics, right? Like, I mean, you could delve way into literature and start bringing up terms or concepts I haven't heard. But again, it's like, it's just the barrier is traced by my practical need for the thing, right? Like, I'll learn ethics to the point that I'm not being troubled in any of my, engagements or discussions or whatever by my lack of understanding of ethics. If I see some kind of problem being generated for me, like I want to argue some particular thing and I'm limited by people bring up this concept and that undermines what I'm saying, and I don't have a response, then I'll suddenly be highly motivated to do a bunch of reading about that thing until I either find out why I'm wrong or can justify why I'm right. But it's kind of like there has to be some real world thing that then I learn the philosophy to do. I won't just go like delving into the philosophy for its own sake.
Yeah, I think this actually neatly ties into what exactly my goals are in this part of my goals in this conversation. It's not just simply to reach the end goal, use the intuition pumps to kind of like draw you towards reference. It's because I've detected that the whole thing about reference seems to be central to a lot of these debates surrounding semantic analysis, but also phenomenological lexicon. And I'm almost in a sense I'm interested in kind of like helping this process of realizing the importance of reference to, say, for instance, like augmenting one's approach, or at least being a theoretical consideration that could enhance one's approach using the phenomenological lexicon, and that would apply regardless of what your interests are or what uses you'd be using the phenomenological lexicon for. Second to that would just simply be if of course if I can't get you interested in kind of like taking on theoretical considerations surrounding reference, at least perhaps acknowledgement from someone who's like as on the ball as you that reference would be in fact a very crucial component of like resolving disputes that don't seem to be easily resolved even using the phenomenological lexicon if we were to develop one. So those would be the kinds of like ways that we can go if of course the interest thing can't be reached. It's mostly about kind of seeing why would I think that reference is in fact like a core problem, well not core problem but like a core kind of like thing that needs to be looked into further for these matters, like the whole conceptual disparity thing. Because I do remember that Joe
Yeah.
Schmid was talking about how this actually is a huge problem in philosophy, generally speaking. So,
So I'm not actually convinced that our views on reference are going to be able to like help out here
yeah,
at all. It could be that they are, but I'm not currently seeing really how talking about reference will help with with resolving conceptual disparity. But I mean I haven't really thought about it, so maybe I'm wrong. But I will say though, like you shouldn't be disheartened by me not being interested. Like it's common for one person to generate an idea and it's someone else who actually is like, "Ooh, that's good. Let me like run with that and see what I can do with that." And then they actually do the impressive work with it, right?
yeah,
Like so maybe you should be that guy. You can you can go figure out all the reference stuff because if it's a genuine like I mean some of the areas I'm interested in would probably be kind of boring to you, right? If this is connecting to your like many years kind of themes of philosophical investigation, which it obviously is, then maybe you're well poised to do some thinking about it and form some views on it. You can certainly run them by me. I definitely like assessing views and stuff. But yeah, so you shouldn't be disheartened by me not being that interested in resolving this on my own. It's often not the person who comes up with the idea who actually does the work to like implement it or resolve it or whatever.
yeah. And so that's basically what I would like to try and make the rest of this conversation about is basically to run these kinds of intuitions by you, see if there's any sort of snagging points that you run across, because of course you're very fucking good at kind of breaking things down, critically analyzing things. So pointing out weaknesses in one's line of thinking is going to be incredibly crucial here, especially if what I'm suggesting is true, that this is a pretty big notion that has a lot of stakes. A notion that surrounds a problem where there's a lot of stakes surrounding, like, the whole problem of regress, stalemate by regress and circularity, that kind of thing. So we just kind of like either create this huge redundant literature where it's like people are just humoring each other's propositions as being meaningful to begin with, when in fact they just turn out to be verbal disputes. Or if it's substantive, we're accidentally calling them verbal disputes when in fact they're substantive, just because the person who's got the terms just doesn't know how the fuck to communicate them, right? So like, it'd be useful to run these intuitions by you because of how good you are at sifting through the bullshit, right? And
oh, sorry.
Yeah, go on.
Well, my bullshit sifting ability is, well, yeah, I do think that's one of the things I'm actually best at, is just the critical thinking, but it's limited by my domain knowledge. So like if you try to run an argument by me that has a lot of concepts I don't know, like it's from like physics or something, then in principle I can think about the logic of the argument and stuff, but there's to the degree that it involves details about physics, you're going to limit my ability to think about it. This is also why we need area philosophers, right? Like philosophers of physics, philosophers of biology, whatever. If we had more philosophers of biology, maybe we wouldn't see such insane levels of retardation on the trans discussion, where literally the mainstream debate is just a pointless semantic dispute that's been raging for like 2 years now.
Yeah.
Like the problems with lack of fill of biology people communicating with biology people much, like, yeah. So yeah, anyway, I'm happy to try to critically appraise your things. I'm just kind of giving some warning that the more domain knowledge it requires in areas that are outside of my scope, the harder it'll be for me to like apply any like critical analysis to what you're saying.
Yeah, for sure. So I do the best to kind of like not include extra like domain stuff. It's mostly trying to navigate these things with like just straight up logic and with commonsensical understandings. But of course, at the same time, we can just pause whenever there's some sort of like weird shit going on, where it's like, actually, we have to kind of like bypass the commonsensical understanding and actually bite down on like, clarifying what the fuck certain terms mean. So that's definitely what we can do here. So would you like to start going through the rest of the document now?
Yeah. I mean, you can go through it every day. I should say I'm probably gonna get off at like maybe like 8:45, 8:50, or sorry, 9:45, 9:50, something like that.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
We can obviously always do another conversation too. Yeah.
Yeah. Of course. So basically, like you mentioned in the discussion with Joe Schmidt, right? There seems to be this kind of like level below semantic discourse, right? Where we can put pressure on whether or not certain terms like have something that they refer to, and that they don't just simply refer to gibberish, or if they actually do just refer to gibberish, right?
Wait, you just referred to that as a level below. That is just semantic analysis.
Yeah, right? Yeah. I was going to clarify that. I remember the wording was something along the lines. It appears like it's non-semantic, but it may just simply be semantic discourse. But we're talking about semantic discourse by using the phenomenological lexicon, something along those lines.
Sure. It sounded for a second like you were saying you're talking about semantic analysis, but referring to it as a level below itself, which tripped me out. But if you're just saying that semantic analysis, like, does this term have meaning? What does it mean? Trying to figure out that is a thing. That's what I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Continue.
Yeah. So now the way in which we would, well, kind of the way that I understand we would engage in this process, where we're at this level of semantic analysis, we can do this by simply just questioning which experiences, if any, contain the thing being referred to. So if we're saying that there's certain sense-independent reasons that are present in the experience of an old lady getting stabbed, right? We'd be comparing that to an anti-realist experience of the same thing and trying to figure out basically what the fuck, if anything, is different between the experience of the anti-realist and the realist, right?
Right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. So, yeah. We can also ask, like, what individuates those experiences between the realist and the anti-realist. So,
what individuates?
Yeah.
How is that different than asking, like, is it?
Yeah, okay. What specifically in the experience is different? Or if we're trying to hone in...
Right.
Yeah, so not just simply talking about the experience itself, because obviously we both experience the that something in that experience is bad, that we're both experiencing the exact same thing there. That's identical. But then it's just trying to individuate, kind of filter through. Okay, I'm actually targeting this thing, whereas you're actually targeting this thing. And so on and so on. So it's like a whole process that you can go through. Now,
Yeah, or the opposite problem. It sounds like I'm targeting this and you're targeting that, but in fact, we're both talking about the same thing.
exactly. Yeah. Now, the reason it can be useful to drag the semantic discourse down to like phenomenological semantic discourse can be simply because otherwise the conversation can continue on indefinitely, resulting in another stalemate in the form of I don't have that concept. It's like if you bite down on specific types of experiences, it's almost like, and again I'm using really loose words here, it almost feels more real in a sense, right? It kind of gives us something to kind of like actually pick out in a sense.
Yeah, it's kind of, in a way, it feels like a lower level of discourse, kind of like a lower like programming level or something, I guess, because we both do CS. Like, because the thing is, there's the argument we're having, and then there's like the semantics behind the argument. But the semantics, we're like we're putting language to things in our experience, right? So it's like there's the experience, then there's the description of it, and something can be lost there, right?
Yeah.
And I suspect something is lost there, and that's what's fucking up the realism discourse. I don't actually have this belief that realists have like radically different quality. I think they just have a different conceptual scheme for describing it, and like you said, then that gives the false appearance of a non-substantive of a substantive dispute. But yeah, so if we were to really start from like, okay, we're taking all these words off the table. You don't get to use moral or any of that. We're like reconstructing our language. Now, let's try to talk about an old lady getting stabbed. What is your phenomenology around that? And then we'd have to, it would take a lot of time and effort to think of how to articulate it, but you'd have to be like, okay, I feel like a strong want for that not to happen. I feel like shocked, like you can talk through it and then see if you can converge on the experience there. Yeah, so I don't know, that's kind of like the idea. So yeah, it feels like it's a layer lower or something than the semantics, because it's like it's the thing that the semantics are like supposed to kind of describe, right? So you might be fucking up at the stage of describing, where you guys are both having the same experience, then different descriptions of it are being offered.
Yeah, exactly. The discrepancy of language there, right? The verbal dispute stuff. And there's plenty of motivations, of course, for attempting to approach situations like this with the phenomenological lexicon, right? So in your chat with Joe Schmid, I recall you saying like approaching the problem with the phenomenological lexicon feels less shitty than stalemate. Have fun doing philosophy in your little universe, it's something that helps us approach the situation, that kind of thing. And there's definitely benefits to gain from that. Whether or not that has to do with whether or not your opponent is convinced, it also is very useful in kind of like, I don't know, doing narrative even to like the audience in a sense, right? Where it's like, well, look, the majority of fucking people can understand what the fuck I'm saying. The majority of people would be able to utilize what I'm saying in a very like clear way. And it's like, it can also be used in a sense to kind of like weed out dishonest thinking or weed out dishonest actors, right? I remember that in that chat you had with Joe, there was a point where you were referring to like the whole regress problem, and how if you break it down to the point where your propositions end up being something like dogs exist, right? It starts to look really, really stupid for your opponent to deny propositions like that. So it just ends up almost acting as a way to kind of weed out dishonesty in a sense, right?
Semantic analysis does?
Yeah, this like the phenomenological discourse, where we're breaking it down to really ordinary experiences in a sense. And it's like we can't kind of like disagree on what we're experiencing. So what the fuck are you disagreeing with me about? And it's like that would just show that it's either verbal dispute or they're just dishonest.
I'm not sure. Like, I mean, I do think generally, like, doing semantic analysis and logic and all this stuff tends to, like, weed out people who are just full of shit. Like, any kind of analysis is, like, bad for someone who's bullshitting.
Yeah. Yeah, so, and that's basically what I'm saying, is, like, the analysis part is always fucking crucial in debates and shit like that. But we'll move on. So, obviously, the type of a proposed solution to these issues where people were, like, regressing and shit like that, I like to base it literally on the quote that you said as well, where it's like 99% of the solution is defining the problem clearly, right? And that kind of thing is true of semantics generally.
That's a quote from my grandpa, actually, but
yeah. Yeah, it's a fucking good quote too. Like,
It is, and it's hilarious because so often, like even in that squirrel quote, right? Like people will call it semantic hair splitting or something like that, and it's like, okay, so the debate norm right now, which large segments of the audience will actually shame you if you don't engage in, is just start debating, just start arguing about the truth of the thing.
Mm.
And in fact, that's totally retarded because like it might not even be something capable of being true. So you'd be like engaging in like you'd be like the person arguing at the campfire in James' example. So that just means we have really fucking stupid debate norms right now, and that audiences are like too retarded to understand semantics. So that's like really bad.
Mm.
But wait, there's one thing I was gonna say. William James circling the squirrel. Um, Semantic analysis triggers people and makes them. Oh yeah, but yeah. So the stupid thing is that very often the if people would just stop being fucking retarded and just sit there with you and work through the semantics, you would realize you don't even disagree. But instead, it's funny because they think you're holding up the conversation, but oh, the fucking irony, right? Because
Mm.
if they were to stop actually being the person holding up the conversation and have the semantic discussion that needs to be had to even tell if there's a debate to be had in the first place, then we would possibly be able to actually resolve it or find out where we disagree, as opposed to launching into something that's not resolvable, like debating whether a non-proposition is true,
Mm.
right?
Yeah, of
So yeah,
course.
it's just a frustrating thing because 99% of the problem in that case is like just defining the question clearly. But there's a norm that many debaters and the audience has, which is you don't do that. You just argue. It's like it's so stupid because defining the problem often like gives you the answer. And if you're not allowed to do that, then you just spin your wheels forever. And these people in infinite wheel spinning mode are sitting there telling you you're spinning your wheels. It's just like,
Yeah,
dude,
irony.
kill
Just yeah, literally. And
irony.
yeah, it's the problem of overshooting, right? You're wanting to jump straight to falsification or verification when we haven't even got something that we know for sure even is able to be falsified or verified, right?
That's
So
exactly right.
yeah,
And it's funny because people I just don't think that people have explored those pathways enough to appreciate how badly it undermines a discussion. Right? If it
yes,
turns out you're talking about a non-proposition, there is not a debate to be had. Right?
yeah,
Like that's how bad it is. Is that if you don't understand this, you could literally be having a debate when there is nothing to debate.
yeah,
Like
exactly.
that's like one of the worst situations.
Yeah,
So yeah, the like the shame around semantic analysis right now is crazy. I decided years ago that I'm just a martyr at this point. I don't care if the mainstream has a bunch of people who are like, oh, AY so fucking stupid, blah blah blah, or whatever it is that retarded audiences like MDD or Crucible or wherever will say, Destiny's audience, all these fucking stupid audiences. I'm still going to do semantic analysis and cripple people with it if they try to use semantic bullshit tactics, which is very
mm,
common. For the record, I don't think the realist move is necessarily a semantic bullshit tactic. It's possible they actually believe that stuff, but a lot of semantic shit is like totally like if you resolve the semantics, the other side is just fucked, like the regressive woman definition stuff.
yeah,
Um, so I'm going to keep doing semantic analysis, and retarded people can keep bitching and moaning about it, but eventually it will just become obvious from defeating people using this methodology that it's correct.
yeah.
I can tell that obviously from using it in my own life to resolve many issues. So yeah, I'm just fine martyring myself for the greater good here of having like non-retarded debate norms.
Yeah. So, and that's the thing. It's like, with these types of problem cases, like the regressive definition of woman, it's like it may just simply turn out to be a verbal dispute, but they've also got motivated reasoning to kind of
Oh
like
yeah.
maintain some sort of a political stance for whatever reason, right?
Yep.
So it's just like not being clear that your motivations are X, Y, and Z, and basically just lying or being intellectually dishonest about what you actually take certain things to mean, or what you take to be true, what you take to be meaningful, and so on and so on and so on. So it's like it just all boils down to like being some sort of fucking dishonest tactic. It's rhetorical. It's purely rhetorical to like gain some sort of fucking brownie points with a certain demographic or group, and so on and so on. But yeah, it's one of those
I
things.
don't know about that, dude. Some of these people are actually fucking retarded. They don't think semantic matters. Like they're actually that confused.
Yeah, true, true. Well,
So
putting.
some are bad faith. So, like someone like Bogardus, I think is deeply bad faith.
Okay.
But some of them are like I bet a lot of these audiences are just confused. They've just seen a lot of debates. They have an idea of what a debate is supposed to look like, but most of the debaters don't know any philosophy. They're just like retards like T-Jump or something, right?
Right.
So I don't want to say the audience is all bad faith for thinking I'm doing something wrong when I don't operate by these norms, but I do think that if they were ultimately to think clearly, unless they're like basically like retarded or have some like radical like other mode of thinking that I'm like totally unaware of that somehow answers like all these issues, then
Yeah.
they could just understand what I'm saying and take the time to think about it. They'd be like, okay, obviously you do that. Of course you can't fucking debate something without knowing what it means. Like you have to be retarded to think that.
Yeah. Of course. Sorry, I know that the conversation has been going way longer than it should have. I would definitely like to kind of like wrap things up. I'll just make sure that this ending portion is clear. So I wanted
Yeah.
to outline a problem where, if, say, for instance, the dispute in the semantic analysis part of things, where we've even broken it down to the phenomenological level, if it turns out to actually be substantive, we still have a problem where it's like, okay, there's this specific issue at play that would prevent some sort of like concept from, being able to be shown in a sense, to be able to feature in a proposition, and so on and so on. The kind of stuff that we were covering earlier on in the conversation. But yeah, so I wanted to go through that quickly, and then also saying that there's the ontological level. I want to kind of like explain that, kind of like pose the idea to you and see what you think. Right, so
Sure.
we'll start off with the problem. So, suppose you have a colorblind person who is skeptical of the existence of colors, and even if we created a shared phenomenological lexicon to target what is being referred to by, for example, purple, this still won't help the colorblind person grasp the concept of purple, let alone color. Now, of course, that isn't necessarily an issue that you would kind of take as an issue for yourself. It's just a theoretical consideration, right? So, the solution in this example, obviously, would have something to do with the science of color perception, and specifically sense augmentation. Like, that would be the only type of way to approach the situation to find a resolution. See, okay, I'm experiencing color, the color purple, in this portion of my experience, right? I'm looking at a bookshelf. There's multiple books on the shelf, and each of them have separate colors. Now, there's a purple book that is in between a cyan book and a blue book. That is the only purple book on the shelf, right? It wouldn't help the colorblind person in that example, even if they saw it themselves. The only solution would have to do with sense augmentation. Now, it's not so obvious that a similar sort of solution would be applicable to cases like, say, for instance, trying to show someone the concept, or what the concept of desire refers to, or what the concept of proposition refers to. It may be easier with the concept of proposition, but it's not as easy with the concept of desire. It is certainly nowhere near as easy with the concept of existence. If someone likes the fucking concept of existence, what the fuck are we going to do? Like that's...
I'm going to, as I said, probably leave the conversation. And then
Yeah, literally.
People like you can then spend your lives trying to engage with people who know what the fuck being is or something.
Yeah, for sure. But it's just one of those interesting things where it's like, okay, with the color example, we do have a substantive dispute. There is something that they would experience, given they literally just had sense augmentation. So there's something that they were lacking in kind of like their perceptual apparatus. So that was the thing that was blocking that phenomenological discourse thing from working. But if that thing was resolved, then the phenomenological approach would work. Is the point to kind of extract out of that example. Now,
that's right. To be clear, if the goal is to actually get them to have the concept, then if you can't like share it directly or like augment if they can't actually experience the concept directly, then a phenomenological lexicon cannot help them there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's right. I agree with that.
Okay. So I want to kind of like hypothesize here that there is a level. It is a part of semantic analysis. It's all part of the analysis part of things, right? But it's not necessarily a part of analysis where you actually have to do the discourse with the person. It's mostly how one can analyze it from their own perspective. Say, for instance, if they do in fact like see something that is distinct in an experience that their interlocutor is not even able to see in their experience, then there's a deeper level of analysis that we can even drag furthermore than the phenomenological level. So what I've got written here is basically there's a layer below phenomenology where we can put pressure on whether our shared experiences are even apt for containing the thing we're referring to, right? So in the colorblind example, of course, their perceptual apparatus is not apt for experiencing color, all right? So. And we can of course.
Sorry, I have to just say one thing here, just to be clear. In the colorblind case, though, although just for the record, if I were the colorblind person, I would be convinced that people have an experience of color. Although I would not have the concept myself, I would understand that there's some other dimension of sensory experience that they have access to, and I'd be persuaded of that based on like the level of convergence that people have on the concept and the fact that we have like a brain-based explanation for like variances in the concept, like color.
Yeah.
Like if people did that with morality, which is what Avi like encourages some of them to do, which is hilarious, then I would. I mean, if there was data like that, I would just form the view that I'm conceptually blinded somehow, and I just lack. It's like lacking a sense. I just don't have it, but it's absolutely real. It's precisely the absence of anything like that doesn't. Well, I shouldn't say it's precisely the absence because I also have reasons counting in the other direction, but the absence of anything like that is part of what contributes to me not having the view that I'm just conceptually deprived and realists all actually have some coherent concept there. I'm just pointing out, I would form that view if I were blind, and I wouldn't about the realism, and it's because there's a difference with respect to the data. It's beside the point of what you're saying, which is about actually trying to share the concept. But I just wanted to mention that so it doesn't seem to anyone like I'm taking the view that if I were like colorblind, I would like to take the view that all the other people like don't actually have a concept of color.
For sure.
Now, if you made it a parallel situation or something, like I seem to have some other concept as a blind person that seems to do all the work in the same way, and I can refer to these things and everyone sees it in the same way, and there's no brain explanation about people who can and can't. The second you make the situations more similar, then I would be the color blind person who's like, yeah, I really am not sure if this whole color thing is real.
Yeah, it could
so just some side notes.
Yeah, of course.
You don't have to respond to all that. I didn't want to throw you off your train of thought. So, but yeah.
Yeah, of course. We could break the colorblind situation down where it's like they're actually perceiving different like shades of gray that have a specific hue and saturation type thing that seems to correspond to what they're referring to by purple, but they just don't know where the fuck the color part of that is. So we could break it down that way. But anyway, that is besides the point. So like when I'm talking about breaking it down to the ontological level, right, where we're no longer necessarily questioning the person, we're just questioning whether or not their perception is even apt for containing the thing we're trying to refer to by, say, purple, and so on and so on. The way that we can approach that kind of problem is simply by questioning what conditions would need to be met for them to actually experience that thing, right? Or let's say, for instance, we're given a thought experiment, and it seems like the thought experiment itself doesn't even contain the thing in question, right? So if we use the phenomenological approach to kind of like communicate, okay, we have these experiences, we have these scenarios that we're looking at. Can you point to me where the thing exists in this scenario? Let's say the thing doesn't actually end up existing in that scenario. So we'd have to understand what the conditions for the thing actually being there in a scenario is. So that's something we can question as well. Like, what would be the conditions for, say, purple existing? And that's where I bring in the whole color science example. We have to understand different photon wavelengths correspond to different colors. So you've got the sense augmentation aspect, and we've got the actual color science aspect, just generally speaking, and the perception aspect. So this would be just simply an example of bringing it down to the ontological level. So the ontological level it includes science, but it can also include things in philosophy as well, where we're talking about things like existence, talking about things like propositions, talking about things like desire, where it's not so easy to point out where desire is present in X, Y, and Z experience, right? Especially if one cannot experience it, right? So if we do find like types of answers to these types of questions, they would kind of like put at least some sort of like it'd be plausible to think that it would kind of like stop a regress of I'm not seeing what you're talking about. I'm not seeing what you're talking about. But the only difficulty is there such a solution for those examples like desire, existence, propositions, truth, meaning, and so on and so on. So yeah, basically, I was just going to argue as well that we already know what it's like to drag the phenomenological discourse down to ontology, right, with the colorblind case, right? I've already covered all the points I've got in my document, so yes, that's basically it. But I will say that there are actually, on top of that, there's challenges for the ontological approach where we talk about the color perception science and stuff like that, and how it doesn't seem to be as obvious that there is such a solution that exists for philosophical debates or meta-level debates. Say, for instance, there is some sort of substantive metaphysical dispute, right? It doesn't seem like there'd be such a solution where it's like we have to augment cognition or we have to augment perception in order to like finally perceive what these philosophers are talking about. It seems like there'd be something else. And I want to argue, basically, that just like when we approach the question of how do we tell someone else, in a philosophical sense, that something is true, we developed formal logic to convey, to communicate the basis on which we would deem something as true. So we provide a set of premises that jointly entail the thing that we're saying is true. And I think we can do something similar with meaning, or showing that something is truth apt, right? And basically that would be through the mechanism of reference. And that intuition is just simply based on one of the things that you said, where it's like, basically, here it is. I can't accept some proposition like X exists, but I'm not sure what X refers to. It might not even be a proposition to say it exists. Imagine if it just refers to some gibberish. So, are you following so far?
Sammy, I understand that you think that somehow reference will help resolve problems of conceptual disparity, or could. I don't understand how you think that'll happen, but
Hmm.
I get that much of what you're saying.
Okay.
Also, I should flag. I'm gonna get off in a minute here because I'm a bit hungry. So I think
Of course.
I've been on. I actually only intended to stay for an hour, but I enjoy talking to you, so I've stayed longer than I meant to. But I'm
Well, thank
happy
you
to
so
do a
much, man.
follow up.
Yeah.
Some yeah, I sort of cut you off mid reasoning here, but yeah, I don't know. Is there any kind of like closing thing you want to say here?
Yeah, for sure.
And sorry if some of the questions I mean, I guess there's nothing to say sorry for. I can't help it, but yeah, sorry if you had sort of higher expectations for my answers on some of these, but yes, unfortunately, some of these are just not topics I like spend time with, really.
Yeah, that's totally fine, man. Yeah, I think I can kind of just close the conversation. At least for now, we can always do part three, right? Where we kind of like explore deeper
Sure.
what I mean by reference contributing to this issue or it being an important part. That's something I do need to
Yeah.
cash out further. That I think would lead to a pretty interesting conversation because I'm saying that it has some sort of relevance to the phenomenological lexicon approach. It has some sort of thing to say about whether or not we can resolve these kinds of like unsatisfactory regress stalemate type scenarios, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I can literally just close by saying basically that I think so far we kind of have examples of ways that we can kind of we can reduce the conversation further to a lower level than the phenomenological, where we talk about things like in the colorblind example, like we can talk about color perception, sense augmentation being the things that would enable the phenomenological level to actually work, right? And basically that when we're even talking about the phenomenological level, we're talking about referring to things in our experiences that are supposed to be the things that these concepts are referring to, like color, desire, stance independent reason, and so on. So I think there is reason to believe, in virtue of these examples, that at least that there is a lower level of discourse than phenomenology that would resolve its shortcomings. But also that reference would be a central thing to be looking at, that we should fucking actually investigate reference. Not necessarily that you should, right? But anyone who's watching this, who's actually got some interest in trying to solve these types of issues, reference should probably be a place that gets flagged as important, at the very least. And that's as far as I want to establish, at least for this conversation. And besides that, I'll let you go eat. Thank you so much for having the conversation with me. And I apologize for the unclarity, at least earlier in the conversation.
No, I mean, I think you're yeah. Let me just think of how to say what I want to say here. No, I enjoyed the conversation, and I think you made a lot of interesting points, and I think you are, for the most part, pretty clear. I get lost with some of the things you're saying, but it's not like unclear generally. Um, and yeah, I understand the claim you're making is that reference can play some meaningful role here in resolving problems of conceptual disparity. I'm not sure I understand the whole way you think that works. Maybe you don't have an exact way you think it works, but you kind of want to investigate that, or at least you think it's important. So I'm not sold on it being important for this problem, but I also just don't really understand the arguments for it. So yeah, we could like pick that up sometime, and you can try to kind of persuade me of the relevance of why is the word skipping my mind here? The relevance of what the fuck was the thing we were just talking about, Darren?
Reference and
Oh,
the
the reference. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, the relevance of reference to resolving problems of conceptual disparity.
Yeah, no worries. Well, I do think it's been an interesting conversation for sure. But yeah, thank you so much again for actually joining me to do this. I know it's been a very fucking long conversation, but yeah, hope to pick up on part three, and I'll actually make a little bit more progress in terms of clarity and so on and so on.
Yeah, man, we can gradually work it out together. All right, well, it's good talking to you, Darren.
Yeah,
Good conversation. Have a good rest of your night or
yeah,
day.
you
I
too.
guess it's morning over there for you.
Yes,
For me, it's
indeed,
night.
indeed. Alrighty, catch you later, man.
Okay, have a good one, buddy.
Cheers.